What you can do to help is to go online and become part of the public discourse. You know, people ask me what I actually do. Mostly what I do is I insert myself in the public discourse, in the international discourse on this issue.
Welcome to a new episode of Most Memorable Journeys. My guest today is a very interesting lady that I met at the Cyprus Diaspora Forum because she's a presenter and moderator there, but she is so much more than this. She is the Vice President of the Australian Parthenon Committee. She is a cultural heritage activist, and I want to find out what else she is because there's a lot about her, and I want to welcome you to Most Memorable Journeys, Elly Symons.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. It's lovely to be with you. And I'm so happy that we did actually meet and at the Cyprus Diaspora Forum.
It's a fascinating event. It was my second, and I wasn't sure anymore. Were you here last year?
Yes, I was. I think we met very briefly in the sort of around the coffee the coffee station. But yes, I was there last year, and I interviewed and presented it last year and this year.
It's always a little hectic, so there's so many people to see, and somebody was telling me on Saturday I was out and at an event, and somebody was saying, "Oh, Elizabeth was at the Diaspora Forum. She was scouting."
Scouting, yes. Well, as you said, there are so many wonderful people in the Cyprus diaspora, and for a long time it's always been over the years we come back to Cyprus to visit our cousins and our families, but this was a really good opportunity for people to come with that collective experience as diaspora Cypriots to kind of talk to each other and find out what it's like to come from America, Australia, the UK, South Africa, wherever you are, and have that common experience as that love for Cyprus, but to live outside of Cyprus and to try and connect those two parts of your lived experience. It's a great way for us to do that.
Yeah, and I've noticed, and I see that diaspora Cypriots are the best ambassadors because they love this country even more than people who live here.
That's what they say. I mean, they always say to us, "Oh my God, you love Cyprus so much," and I get the same. I'm half Greek and half Cypriot, and I get the same comments when I'm in Greece. "Oh my God, you love Greece so much. You guys are the best ambassadors." I think that's very true. It's close to our hearts, and when you're away, I think when you're away from something, you idealize it. And you yearn for it, so it's quite a powerful feeling.
It is, and as you just mentioned before, you are half Cypriot, half Greek, but you were born in Australia. So,
correct.
What are you?
What am I? Well, I guess this is the journey. That one of identity. Well, look, my story goes back. Actually, I briefly said to you that my grandparents migrated to Australia from Ithaca, the beautiful island of Ithaca, the fabled island of Odysseus, in 1924, so 100 years ago. But in fact, my great-grandfather, he went to Australia in 1898 from Ithaca. He landed in Melbourne, and he lived there he actually even went to the goldfields in Western Australia. And he worked in Australia for about 3 years and then went back to Ithaca in around 1901. Was married and had his family. And then my grandfather, who was the eldest child, he went to Australia in 1925. But so in fact, 125 years ago, my great-grandfather from Ithaca got on a boat and made a very long journey to Australia. And I'm really proud of that because in 1898, it was an extraordinary trip, and he had no English, obviously, but he worked and made money and went back to Ithaca to, try and create a life for his family.
What an amazing story. Do you think that this had an effect on your grandfather, who then went to Australia? You think he taught?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I think so. This idea of chain migration, and the same thing happens in Cyprus. So in Ithaca, people started to leave it because Ithaca was a small island and it didn't have a lot of agriculture. A lot of Ithacans were very close to the sea, so a lot of them were sailors. So they worked in the merchant ships. So because of that, the island of Ithaca and Castellorizo, which is another very tiny, quite barren island, a lot of these people did work on ships. And so they had access to travel. And these were the first Greek immigrants to Australia, were from Ithaca, from Castellorizo, and from Kythera. So the oldest Greek populations in Australia are basically from these islands. And so in the 1880s, when the first Ithacans went to Australia, then of course they found work because it was the gold rush. And Melbourne was booming in the 1880s. It was a boom time city. So they were making money in restaurants and cafes and grocers and like the food business. And so they would write back to their villages and bring their cousins out because there was money to be made. And that's how chain migration works, really. The first people go out and they do well, and so they write back to the villages and the towns, and other people join them. So that's how it kind of happened in my grandparents' case. And so, yes, my grandfather then, there was already an established sort of Ithacan and Greek community in the early 1900s. And I guess he decided in 1924 that he would do what his father did and go to Australia to make some money, which he did, and he stayed there. And then 10 years later, he wrote back to the relatives in Ithaca asking for a bride. And so my grandmother was sent to Melbourne to marry my grandfather, which is Proxenia, the arrangement. Mm.
Oh my God, that alone is a podcast. That is amazing because
it is, and my grandmother was quite a remarkable woman. She was actually born in Romania of Ithacan parents. Her father was he worked on boats, so he was a captain of barges on the Danube River in Romania. So my grandmother was born there, and she was an only child, and she was orphaned at 12. Her mother died, and then her father died a year later. So she was shipped back to Ithaca, aged 13, 14, and then 10 years later, she was shipped off to Australia to marry my grandfather. And I remember asking her, when I was about 20, I had a heart-to-heart chat with her, and I remember asking her, what if you didn't like
exactly?
What if you didn't like Paul when you got there and you made this journey? What if you didn't like him? And she said to me, and this was also very unusual. She said to me, her aunt and uncle, who were her guardians, said to her, if she didn't like him, she could return. Which was unusual because I don't think that was the deal for most proxy brides. It wasn't the deal that they could return. Anyway, she said he was a pretty nice guy, so she decided to stay, and they went on to have 4 children. One of them was my mum. And my grandfather did very well in Melbourne. He had restaurants, and so he educated. My mum and her siblings went to the best private schools in Melbourne, and which was also very unusual in the 1940s and 50s. Yeah, so that was my mum's story, and my dad's story is slightly different. He's from Cyprus, as we've mentioned, from the village of Agros in the Troodos Mountains. And he was the youngest of 5 children. And he was fortunate in that he was clever, very clever, and he was the youngest child. So his elder siblings were had left home. He was fortuitous because when he was ready for high school, a high school had just opened in Agros. He was able to go to high school and continue his education, which in those days, not that many people went to high school. And so he went to the equivalent of year 10, then came to Nicosia, and completed his studies in English. So he was extremely fortunate to have finished high school and in English, with English. So he decided to migrate to Australia in 1951. And it was fortunate for him because he had this education. Many Cypriot immigrants in those days had to go and work in factories and do, very, very, very difficult work. And he was able to go to Melbourne University to study law,
Wow.
which was quite an extraordinary achievement. And he didn't actually complete his law degree, sadly, because it was quite difficult. I mean, studying law in your first language is difficult. So
Yes.
studying law in your second language in those days,
Yeah.
with no tutoring, no help. And also he had to work as a waiter late at nights to support himself. So he didn't end up completing his studies, but he also ended up in restaurants in the city of Melbourne. So on both sides of my family, we were in restaurants in the centre of Melbourne. So I actually grew up as a Melbourne girl, very urban Melbourne girl. Yes. So that's my background.
Do you know how your parents met?
Yes. Again, it was somewhat arranged. In those days, well, it was 1960. So I think there was an Ithacan man who worked in my father also had a brother that went to Australia. And he also had cafes in the city. And there was an Ithacan man that worked in his shop. And so they said, oh, we know this Ithacan family with a lovely daughter. Would you like to meet her? And so there was a meeting in the cafe between my mother and my father, and my uncle and my grandfather were chaperoning this meeting. So that's how it was done in those days.
Crazy. And when you were saying before, I sorry that I just interrupted you.
That's okay.
It was funny because when you were saying they went to Australia and they wrote, and can you imagine how long a letter took then from Australia to Greece or to Cyprus?
Yes.
I mean, the whole story, when you think of it today, you would send a WhatsApp message,
Exactly. Everything was done the slow way. These were slow times. These were snail mail and slow travel, and yes, it was obviously a very different period.
Do you think it was better? Sometimes I wonder, because I think it's too fast in today's world.
I think it is too fast. I think I think we can all adapt to change. I mean, humans are very good at adapting to change. I think it's the rate of change that is the problem with us. I mean, we learn one technology, and in 6 months later, you go to your phone and the app that you used to use for something, suddenly they've changed the app, and you think, oh my God, but I was good at the app before. And I think it's the rate of change that causes a lot of anxiety, not the actual change.
Yeah.
It's just too fast,
Yeah. Now tell me, so your parents got married, the Greek, the Greek lady and the Cypriot man got married, and little Elly appeared on the scene.
Yes. She
how
did.
often did you come to? Did you come to?
Yes.
Or how often did you come to? And also, where did you go? Did you go to both? Did you go to Greece and to Cyprus, or was it a?
Well, so we were a little bit removed from Greece because it was my grandparents that had migrated. My mum was born in Melbourne, and so we didn't really. We didn't really know our relatives in Greece. They were sort of a bit remote. Whereas because it was my dad that had come from Cyprus, he talked about his siblings and he talked about Cyprus a lot because obviously he really missed it. And he would always, when he was talking about Cyprus, he would, start his sentence with back home,
Oh,
such and such would happen. So for him, it was home. And he really missed it. And so it was when I was growing up, we really heard about Cyprus a lot, whereas we didn't hear about Greece terribly much because my mum was born in Australia. So she didn't have those stories about Greece. Um, and I came to Cyprus when I was about 2. So obviously, I don't remember. Well, one interesting thing, when my father left, when he was 19, he returned. So he returned when he was 37 with a wife and 2 children. So he was missing for 20 years. So he saw his mum in that year with me and my brother and my mum. So we stayed with our yaya and papu. And then not long after we left and went back to Australia, my yaya died. So she only saw her son after she waved him off to Australia, aged 19. She saw him again, aged 37, and then she died. So there's the thing about the diaspora, especially with the Australian diaspora,
well,
we
that's what we
often
were saying before. And, I want to elaborate a little bit on this because we were mentioning how far it is.
It is far. So with the UK Cypriots, the Charlies, and they can come very easily to Cyprus, and even from America, it's not that far. But the Australian Cypriots, it was so far away. We just, my parents couldn't put a family of 5 on the plane and can come and leave their businesses and come to Cyprus for 6 weeks or 4 weeks. So we just couldn't do it. So I think the Australian Cypriot diaspora really was so removed, and now obviously travel is much simpler and we can come more often. But in those days, we really couldn't. So that was one trip I had to Cyprus when I was 2. And then the next time I came, I was about 10, and it was after the invasion. We came in 1976. My father was one of the founders of the PSECA movement, the Justice for Cyprus Committee, that was a worldwide movement. And so we came to a conference in 1976. So that was really my first memories of Cyprus as a 10-year-old, just about a year after the invasion. And that really had a profound effect on me, I have to say.
Yeah. I wonder, because it must have been such a different life. In 76, Cyprus was still very, very undeveloped, let's say. Because
correct. And it
was quite, without wanting to be condescending or anything, but it was a little backward.
Yes, I came from Melbourne, so
Exactly.
I had to get my mind around very basic things like the toilets. I can remember in the village that the toilets were holes in the ground, and they were just abominable to us. And my mum had to cajole us into sort of. I said, well, I can't go into that toilet. They were pretty backward. And just, yes, the whole thing, it was just, you felt like you stepped back in time, really, when you'd come from a big city like a metropolis like Melbourne. But then, of course, just all these relatives, it was just an extraordinary thing to meet all these relatives. And there was so much love, and just to understand for the first time, even as a 10-year-old, where my father came from, his home and his people and his village and just who he was. We knew him as a, young restaurant owner in Melbourne. We didn't know him as a Cypriot in Cyprus. So I remember that trip had a profound effect on the way I felt about Cyprus. Yeah.
And maybe a little bit the way you felt about your father.
Yes, well, I'm pretty close to my dad, and I realise now with kind of the work I do, what I see as my civic responsibility. I really get that from my
Yeah,
dad,
yeah,
and I said I was interviewed recently, and I made the point that I. It was never lectured to me to be a civic person. It was modelled to me. He
yeah.
modelled this after 1974. He was one of the founders of the Cypriot community in Melbourne, and they organised so many things for the refugees, and they raised money, and he sponsored people. He personally sponsored about 15 or 20 people to come to Australia. He helped them get bank loans. He helped them get married. He helped them learn English. He gave them jobs. Like, he was a very civic person. And he was a history buff as well. He had studied history at university as well, especially, ancient Greek history was his thing. So which will segue nicely into my love for the Parthenon in ancient
Mhm.
Greece, and how I sort of realised that this issue of the Parthenon marbles was something that I was driven to do something about. Yeah, so I think that all really came from my dad.
Yeah, and it's very interesting what you're saying, because whenever I talk to, like, sometimes to younger mothers, and they, that I have grown up kids, and sometimes they say, how did you do this? And I always say, it's not what you say to your children, it's how you live. They model you, they watch you.
Abs-
And
It's absolutely true,
yeah,
Elizabeth.
yeah.
And I have had three sons, and so one thing I was really conscious of modelling to them that I was a stay-at-home mum, as it turned out. Did have a sick child, so I was home. I was a stay-at-home mum. So what I did was that I just made sure I was always involved in community things, in the sporting clubs, in the schools. I put my hand up to volunteer for all sorts of things. So my sons saw me exhibiting that, being a civic person, being part of a community, saying, I'll do that. I'll help with this. I'll take the kids that can't get to the basketball games. I'll take them. I'll be the team manager. I think that's modelling this is extremely important. It's how you choose to live your life in that civic community way.
So true, so true. And kindness goes a long way. Something crossed my mind when we were talking about how far Australia is. And one thing that I have
Yes.
noticed at the diaspora as well, and generally, the Australian Cypriots are a very close-knit community. And I was thinking just now, maybe that's why, because they can't come home or couldn't come home as much as the others.
No, possibly that's true.
Maybe that's all they had,
Yes, I think that's right. I think that look, I think that's possibly changed a little bit now with this sort of, we're up to sort of third generation Greeks and Cypriots now in Australia, and our children aren't necessarily marrying Greek or
Okay.
Cypriot people, but and also we can travel now, so we can come here more easily and more often. So I think, that's a good thing that we're not so remote as we used to be 30 and 40 years ago.
Oh, yes. But it is true, because some of the people that I have met at the diaspora are a little older, and they are that way. They look after
Yes.
each other. They look out for each other. They make it a point. If you meet the one of them, you have to meet the other one. It's so sweet.
Yes, I think that's true. Well, I think that's the Cypriot hospitality,
Yes, yes.
You've been here a long time. I think Cypriots by nature are very generous, very kind people. And funnily enough, as a Greek and a Cypriot, I do find, I actually live in Athens now, and I really do find Greek people and Cypriot people. I do feel the differences. I'm very aware of them, I have to
Yeah.
say.
But I think Athens is such a big town. The Cyprus does not have towns that size. It makes a
No.
difference, I think. And also, we have to be careful here, because it's not with the Cyprus hospitality is not the same anymore as it. When I came here in the 80s, I
Yes.
came here as a young tour guide, and it was crazy. I used to go and visit hotels. I never left a hotel without being offered a coffee or lunch or stay the night, or I don't know what
Yes.
else. That's not
Yes.
the same anymore. It's important, I think, because for me, that is our strong point, the beautiful,
Yes.
famous Cypriot hospitality.
Yes. Look, I think I think it still exists. Perhaps
does.
it's not the
Yes, yes.
same as, I mean, you can't leave a Greek or a Cypriot taverna without being, even if you choose not to have a dessert, you will be brought fruit
That's
or
right.
a spoon sweet or something. That's
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
that's a ritual. That just, you cannot leave without having that. And it really is a ritual. It's a symbolic of just an acknowledgement of that love, of that hospitality, of respecting the stranger, of respecting the guest,
Yeah.
which goes back a long way. I mean, the Odyssey, really, one of the themes of the Odyssey was that the treatment of strangers, in fact. It was one of the running themes in the Odyssey, and Ulysses arrives at all these places, and he's the stranger, and he has all these different experiences, philoxenia.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Beautiful.
yeah.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about being the vice president of the Australian Parthenon Committee.
Yes.
How does that work? I mean, is there a committee in all the diaspora? Is there one in the US? Is there one in India?
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
there is a loose sort. Well, there is an international organisation of about 20 committees around the world. Many countries have a committee. It's not. I mean, each country organises. It's not a terribly formal organisation. I guess each country has its own way of organising its committee. It's just basically a collection of like-minded people who actually want to roll their sleeves up and be an advocate. And often people ask me, "Oh, what can I do to help?" And I say, "Well, what you can do to help is to go online and become part of the public discourse." People ask me what I actually do. Mostly what I do is I insert myself in the public discourse, in the international discourse on this issue. I mean, often by mainstream media, but that's, over the last decade or so. I mean, it's not easy to get published in a newspaper. Even so, for example, in Australia, okay, I could write a piece for an Australian newspaper about the Parthenon Marbles, but it's not topical in Australia. So, it's not going to get published in mainstream media terribly much. And so in the end, social media is kind of the tool of trade. So across various platforms, I post and I counter other people's posts, and I enter that, I discuss the issue on other people's posts. And I find that social media, if you curate your feed well enough on a particular topic, the algorithm ends up helping you find the people that want to talk about this topic. And in fact, you can access journalists and academics and diplomats and politicians, and you can actually be part of this public discourse on whatever topic of interest. And so that's basically what I do most days, and our team in Australia, that's what we do. Some of them write more for mainstream media, but basically we just keep the issue alive in the public discourse. That's our main task, to support the Greek government's efforts to ask for the return.
Yeah. And to create awareness, because I think there's many people in this world who don't even know about it.
Well, yes, I think that's true. A lot of people don't know about it. Look, most Greeks know about it. Most Cypriots know about it. The average British citizen on the street doesn't really know terribly much about it. And if they're asked, they'll say something like, "Oh, well, are they in the British Museum? Museum? Are they? Oh, well, okay. Oh, well, probably. Or they'll say that Lord Elgin saved them, rescued them from being destroyed, or, the arguments end up being quite spurious. And over the years, the British change the arguments all the time. And so we have to just keep them on their toes. That's why it's important to be in the public discourse so that you can put forward the correct arguments and counter the incorrect arguments, to create that, as you said, to create the awareness and, for the issue.
Do you think they'll ever come back? How beautiful would it look if they were back there?
Yes. Well, the Acropolis Museum was built in 2009 because one of the big arguments of the British was, Greece has nowhere to put them. And we have the British Museum. So the Greek government built the Acropolis Museum in 2009, which was it's an extraordinary building, and it's at the base of the Acropolis. And that's where I live, actually quite near there. So I can pop in, whenever I want and see them close up, and then look up at the Acropolis. And it's, every day it's a vision to behold. But yes, so the British sort of, that's what they say. So we countered that by building a museum. And I do think, look, the talks now are very promising. Prime Minister Mitsotakis has had very high-level talks with Keir Starmer, and there's basically, it's my understanding that there's been a very high-level agreement, but they're trying to figure out the best way, and they're trying to negotiate the deal. So I think on principle they have agreed, but they just have to figure out the hows and how it's going to happen, how and when. But I believe that they will somehow at some time will return to Athens in Greece.
Amazing. We're already far into this podcast, but I want to ask you something completely different, which I was thinking about. What language did you speak in your house when you were small? Did you speak at all?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. We spoke English, but we heard Greek. My father's English was excellent, and my mum was born in Australia.
Yes,
so they did speak. Yes, so English was the primary language in our household, but Greek was also spoken. My parents spoke to each other in Greek and sometimes spoke to us in Greek. But also, I couldn't say it was even half and half. I think, probably it was maybe 60-40, something like that. So we heard, my Greek wasn't that great. And then I studied ancient Greek at university, which was really helpful. And then having lived in Athens now for the last 6 years, my Greek has improved. But, it is a challenging language, but it's an extraordinary language. And I'm working on it. Let's say it's a work in progress.
Good, because, I wrote it on Facebook recently because I was in Greece last week. And when I came to Cyprus many years ago, I spoke Greek because I had learned Greek in Greece.
Fantastic.
And they didn't speak to me here because I was blonde and foreign. So I ended up having this fight all the time, me speaking Greek and them speaking to me in English. But now, after all these years, when I go to Greece, people immediately understand and they ask me, "Are you from Cyprus?" So.
Oh, yes. Well, it's funny when I'm walking in. When I grew up, I couldn't differentiate between Greek and Cypriot. I thought what I was hearing at home was just Greek, but in fact, it was Greek, but also there was lots of Cypriot words. And so I realize that now when I'm in Greece, sometimes I say something to a Greek person and then they look at me, they glaze over and they look at me and I realize I've said a Cypriot word which they don't understand.
Yes.
Which is, I find amusing.
Very, very. It's funny, actually. And I think it's beautiful that this Cypriot dialect is very beautiful. It makes me laugh.
It is. I
Yeah.
think it's. I actually think it's inherently funny. I think there's a humour about the Cypriot dialect. The phrasing of the way they describe things is just inherently funny. It's a lovely take on all sorts of things. Yeah, it's a beautiful dialect. And we love it. So I mean, we all love it. It's
Yeah.
great.
So, Elly, before we come to the end,
Yes.
where it's like a job interview. Where do you see yourself
I
in
can't
10
believe we've
years?
been talking for half an hour.
We've been talking for 40 minutes.
Wow, it's incredible. Well, it's easy to chat with you because you're a very good conversationalist.
Thank you. Are you going to stay in Greece? Are you going to go back to Australia? Will you come to Cyprus to live? What are you going to do?
Yeah, look, I divide my time between the three countries. So
I think that's wise.
my children have grown up and I'm single. So I can, I'm quite portable. So I probably spend about 4 months of the year in Australia, was sort of like December to March, and have Christmas and summer, and then I come back to the Northern Hemisphere from like March to November. Mostly that's in Athens and in Greece, and I usually spend two months of the year in Cyprus, but not consecutively. Like from Athens, I come and go, which is really lovely. I get the best of all three worlds, so I'm really very lucky. And I love living in Athens. It's such a big, cosmopolitan city like Melbourne. I am used to big cities. So I'm fortunate to live between the three countries.
That's beautiful. And I think I'm from Switzerland and I go there often. And I also believe that I really have the best of both worlds. And I love it. And,
Of course.
Let's have a good time.
Exactly. Well, if we can't have a good time, in our more mature years, then, when is it going to happen? So
Exactly. Well, that's it. Thank you so much for being on Most Memorable Journeys today, Elly Symons.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. And thank you also for this podcast and speaking to all these amazing Cypriots. It's really lovely to have the opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you. If you enjoy my podcast, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. You will find all the information in the show notes.